Gray Zone Warfare has been getting a lot of hype recently, but their most recent raw gameplay footage has raised quite a few questions. From concerns about stiff weapon and character animations, overall pacing, and even frogs? There's definitely some valid points to be made here, but let's also remind ourselves that this game is in a pre-alpha state. Now, that doesn't excuse poor gameplay loops and unfun mechanics, but when I'm looking at a game that's at this stage of development, I want the bones of it to be good. I need a solid foundation in order to see the devs' vision for their alpha, beta, and eventual release. Although this was released yesterday by IGN, I was fortunate enough to get my hands on the raw footage of this gameplay thanks to the devs, so no watermark, no pixelation, we can just see everything in crisp 4K goodness. Now I'm going to break down the gameplay video itself, but if you didn't see all 23 minutes of it, it's essentially one mission. You have 4 players in a base, they jump in a helicopter, they are dropped off right outside of a village, and they work their way through the village, grabbing a couple intel items and eventually get exfilled on the other side. With that being said, I first want to talk about the pacing of Gray Zone Warfare. The game itself is self-described as an immersive tactical FPS with a maximum focus on realism. And as someone who has made hundreds of videos on Squad, which the community itself jokingly calls a walking simulator, I don't need a full 30 minutes of non-stop shooting to have fun in video games. Instead, I prefer the tactical or strategic build-up to the firefights. That is what I find fun, and that is why I keep coming back to tactical shooters. Gray Zone Warfare shows us just that. It's slow, it's tactical, and there are many instances where you have a few players moving up while someone else will cover. Still, I've got to say that this showcase may have been a little too slow. Out of the 23 minutes of raw gameplay, we had maybe 7 minutes of actual combat, and I think I'm being a bit generous here, including some of the build-up and breaks of firing. And although that is actually a pretty good ratio for a slower paced tactical shooter, the quality of this combat was what was really concerning to me. I'm a huge fan of PvP shooters, and there's nothing better in gaming than engaging with a real player in a firefight due to how unpredictable that person may act. But there are a few games that do AI pretty well. The first example is Tarkov, and although they might not be the smartest, Tarkov's scavs are legitimate threats, and I don't mean because they can head eyes you from 1,000 meters away with buckshot. No, we're not talking about bullet sponges, and we're not talking about aimbot, wall hacks, any of that stuff. What I mean is that the scavs react to combat in a semi-realistic fashion. When other scavs get shot or killed, the scavs around them try to move towards the danger in order to find and eliminate that threat. They pick up weapons that may be better than the one they already had, and the scav bosses are extremely aggressive in protecting their area. You can also look towards a game like 6 Days in Fallujah, where AI will actively try and flank your position. They'll try to corral you into ambushes, and if you're stationary for too long, or they just know where you are since you're being kind of loud, they'll try and take advantage of you with things like RPGs or sniper fire. It's not the aimbot AI that's the threat, it's the unpredictable nature of these AI enemies that makes the game that much more enjoyable. And what we saw in Gray Zone Warfare was unfortunately very, very basic. This village raid mission looks pretty interesting, but the moment the forward scouts do get killed by the players, nothing really happens. There are guards just 100 meters down the road that don't even react to the gunshots. There's no violence of action, and it just turns into a glorified turkey shoot. You can frequently see enemies running around that get shot, and they just head out towards the open, they turn around midway, they go back into the open, they just stand there waiting to get killed. It's just not a very engaging enemy. Gray Zone Warfare is supposed to be PvPvE, with a heavy focus on the PvE. But if these are the types of enemies we're going to be going up against for the majority of our gameplay loop, I'm not sure if I can stay interested. Slow burn tactical shooters are definitely fun, and there's a huge audience that loves the slower paced, walking around, sneaking around, and planning that goes into a game like this. But if after 5, 10, 30 minutes of moving around, planning, and strategic gaming, you just run into an enemy that literally stands up and asks to be shot, the game is going to be boring. If the enemies you're facing are boring, there's no redemption in the gameplay loop. In saying that, I do know that AI is something that can be fixed and improved on, and this still is just a pre-alpha. But this was my biggest red flag throughout the entire showcase. I liked everything I saw except for the moment when the trigger was pulled, and that is arguably the most important part of the game. At the end of the day, I don't want to shoot dumb AI. It just isn't fun. However, there are a few positives to note from the firefights, such as suppression blur, changing fire modes, being able to free look, and even shoulder swapping to peek around corners. These mechanics are critically important to the immersion that tactical shooters bring, so I'm really glad to see those. There's also more advanced mechanics like choosing how to breach a building, and although I do wish there was an option to maybe bang and clear, or peek a door, maybe crack it open and toss a grenade, that type of stuff, the framework of these types of mechanics is already in place, which is the most important. Now, although I'm not necessarily sold on the gunplay, the visuals here are amazing. UE5 is definitely the future, and we can see that in spades. From the jungle the players are walking through to the mountains in the background, Southeast Asia is a perfect place to showcase just how powerful of an engine this is. And despite some of the player animations looking a little static and potentially placeholder, I do like everything I'm seeing, and the minimalistic HUD amplifies that feeling of being tactical. From the small details like your uniform flapping under the helicopter's rotor wash to the movement of the foliage as players walk through it, you really feel like you're in a realistic environment, and I've got to give credit to the devs for this. However, there's one downside to this environment, and that is that it is overwhelmingly loud. The ambient sound is insane. In my honest opinion, I'm pretty sure all this stuff is placeholder. It is still a little ridiculous, it's very loud, but also when you listen to the weapon sounds, they do sound pretty flat. Once again, I'm pretty sure this is placeholder, but additionally, I did notice that the audio felt like it didn't really transition when the player went inside. Not only was the environmental audio loud, but also player grunts and groans were as if they were just standing next to you and not on the other side of a wall. Directional audio is always difficult, but something 6 Days in Fallujah does insanely well is their intense focus on realistic audio. You have things like muffled audio through explosions or walls.
Up you go, Hunter.
Echoing or dampening depending on the surroundings.
Nice.
And there's also radio filters when you're talking, which you can obviously hear if you're on the radio, but if someone is talking on that radio in close proximity, you can hear both.
Hold left, Hunter, hold left. I'm right behind you.
Hold left.
And this is also something that was a huge miss for Gray Zone. Voice chat was non-existent. I was surprised that in a tactical shooter gameplay showcase, absolutely nobody talked for the entire 23 minutes. It was absolutely silent aside from a few AI voice lines yelling obscenities at players. And even those felt a little placeholdery.
Come on, pussy! You scared?
Sound design is a huge make or break for immersion when it comes to tactical shooters, and the only thing that I thought was done well with regards to sound design here was the difference in material when the players were walking over grass, gravel, or wood. Once again, I know it's all pre-alpha and it's more than likely subject to change, but I just want to underline the importance to the devs that sound design is critical for games like this. Now, when looking at the gameplay loop itself, I am cautiously optimistic. Firefights did result in certain injuries that required medical attention, from blood transfusions to bandages, and I'm going to ignore this bandage, which looks like he's actually putting a toilet roll on his arm, but from the devs themselves, we know that players will bleed out and go unconscious if they actually run out of blood, since the player's body is painstakingly modeled with even the correct literage of blood that you would have in the real world. That is insanely impressive and should make for some interesting triage when you do get into those huge firefights. One thing that did bug me though was that there was no looting. We don't need DayZ or Tarkov levels of loot, but there were no AI bodies that were looted, there were no stashes or no caches that were hit, no meds, food, or water were replenished, just 2 quest items picked up and then they moved out. I'm guessing this was a choice they made when recording the footage, but it really was unfortunate not to include it since they could have showcased potential looting and basic character progression, since we do see things like dropping meds and picking them up between players. Overall, I do think this gameplay reveal was a little bit of a missed opportunity for the devs to really get people hyped. The choice not to include comms, the oppressive ambient audio, and the very basic AI made for a relatively boring trip to the jungle. In saying that though, the foundation that Gray Zone Warfare is showing me has incredible potential. There's custom loadouts, intuitive UI elements, a nice HUD, a fleshed out medical system, basic quest progression, a map that any tactical shooter fan can wrap their head around and appreciate. There's calling for an extract, AI voice lines and helicopters coming in. The world itself is all there. This pre-alpha is in a much better state than I've seen others in even betas or early access. So with that being said, it's incredibly promising and I'm looking forward to seeing more, despite my obvious concerns. Only time will tell, but I really think this is a good base and I'm excited to see more. But what do you guys think? Do you like what you're seeing? Do you need to see a little bit more fluidity in the combat, the medical systems, or is it good? Let me know in the comments down below, and if you like the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. But that's it for me. Until next time, peace.